And welcome to SciFi MineCart Season 2, the show in which we continue to dig up sci-fi that no longer gets, or has never gotten the attention it deserves, and attempt to bring it back into the light. This episode...
If the Terminator and Mad Max got together and dropped acid, it would probably result in this film. This is Turbo Kid. And no, that's not the kid from Power Rangers Turbo. It's Turbo Kid.
Guys, I'm the new Blue Ranger. Isn't that cool or what?
I can see you're all confused now. You're asking, if Turbo Kid is not the kid from Power Rangers Turbo, then what is it? Well, as I'm sure a lot of you would remember, in the 90s there was a huge amount of nostalgia for the 80s. And now, there's a huge amount of nostalgia for the 90s. And that's completely understandable, because nostalgia is, by definition, nostalgic. When you're nostalgic about something, you remember all the good parts and conveniently forget the bad parts. For instance, when I get nostalgic about the 60s, I think about the great music, the floral designs, and the pretty girls. What of course I neglect to remember is the fact that we were locked in a Cold War that threatened to destroy the entire planet with nuclear annihilation. Because of course there's no point remembering the negative parts of a decade, because every decade has their own negative parts. It's easy to think, God, this world is shit, there's a global terrorist threat, the government is trying to control and spy on us, and the entire environment is about to collapse. How I miss the 60s. Oh, wasn't the music good and the girls pretty? And of course there was no problem in the 60s, right? And that's the crux of how nostalgia works. We look at the bad parts of the decade we're in, neglecting the good parts of the decade we're in, and fondly remember the good parts of the previous decades, neglecting the bad parts of the previous decades. So imagine how strong the 80s nostalgia would have been in the 90s if the 80s was the last decade of civilization. What if the 80s ended with an apocalyptic event that ended society? Just imagine how fondly you would reminisce about the 80s if it was literally the last decade where anything was good. Well, what you're imagining right now is Turbo Kid. Set in the apocalyptic dystopian future past of 1997, Turbo Kid is one of the most visually interesting films I've ever seen. It combines 80s memorabilia and style with a clear inspiration drawn from Mad Max to create this dystopian world in which the main character, the Kid, exists. The Kid, who is, by the way, a dead ringer for Mark Hamill, and therefore should be playing young Luke in any Star Wars film that comes up requiring such a role, like Rogue Squadron, hint hint Disney, I know you're watching, has to survive in a post-apocalyptic world that is run out of water. And you'll notice I said water, not diesel, like in Mad Max. And as someone who is currently recording this during the height of the Australian summer, I can see why that would be a bigger problem than diesel, because I've had to drink a lot of water in this 40-degree heat today, but I haven't had to drink much diesel. But Grim, I hear you cry out in shock. How the blazes can they keep their vehicles running if they don't have any diesel? Well, funny you should ask. They use pedal power, which doesn't require diesel. And this leads to some of the most enjoyable chase scenes in cinema history. Imagine the Mad Max chase scenes, but on bicycles. In fact, don't bother imagining it, because I'm probably showing it to you on the screen right now. And this is the perfect time to talk about the humour in the movie, which is executed extremely well. While there is funny dialogue, the dialogue that is funny is delivered straight. It doesn't stand up and announce itself as funny, but instead achieves that goal naturally with relative ease. Now, before I go any further, fair warning that following this point there will be spoilers, gore, and profanities, so you've been warned. So if you don't want to see spoilers, gore, or hear profanities, you've got exactly 5 Mississippis to click off of this video before they begin. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, and the final and much anticipated 5 Mississippi. Let's begin. Firstly, the gore. The gore is so wonderfully and entirely over the top that even if you're not into gore, you'll probably be okay with most of this. It's over the top to the point of Monty Python and the Holy Grail over the top, so it's more funny than anything else. Although, you'll notice I said mostly. There was one scene that wasn't quite cartoony enough, and it still was very gross and even grossed me out a little bit. So I do have to say, if you're not into gore, you still might have to give this movie a miss because of that one scene that might be a bit too much for you. Or maybe just watch it with a loved one and get them to cover your eyes when you get to that scene. And that said, for me at least, that one scene that was super gross was worth sitting through just to get to some of the most interesting, over-the-top, bloody and gory fight scenes I've ever seen. The film definitely mixes its genres very well. As I said, it is set in a Mad Max-style desert environment. Although the main character, far from being a Mad Max clone, is instead a young kid who is not exactly very well experienced in the hero game. Instead, his knowledge of being a hero is derived entirely from comic books. And eventually he finds himself the suit of the hero from his comic books, which is sort of a Kamen Rider style hero, which makes this film sort of also a superhero film.
And who exactly are you supposed to be?
I'm a superhero.
Moving on to the damsel in distress character, she's refreshingly not that much of a damsel in distress. In fact, if we want to get technical, she's not even a damsel nor a she, as she is, in fact, a robot. And she's named Apple, which I can't help but wonder if it's a reference to the company or not. Is she an girlfriend? I'm not sure. And finally there's the other main character, who is actually probably a secondary character, but he's almost a main character, it's somewhere on the cusp of the two, is the badass Australian arm wrestling champion dude called Frederick, who makes every single scene he's in enjoyable, and is an absolute barrel of laughs. I hope to see him in more films. And then on the other team, we have the villain, Zeus. Zeus is a bad guy. He's a very bad guy. In fact, he's probably worse than most bad guys I've seen. Zeus is quite literally a monstrous character. You see, remember earlier in the video, I mentioned that the shortage is not diesel in this film, it is water. Well, Zeus has found quite a clever way around it. You see, he's created this machine which extracts the juice from people. So he's literally crushing people to extract the juices from their corpses and then selling that water to people. Even Emperor Palpatine wasn't doing something like that. It is probably the most evil thing I've heard someone do in a movie, or in real life. It's quite honestly probably the most deliciously villainous thing I've ever seen anyone do in a movie, and I bet the people who made Mad Max went on and watched Turbo Kid and just kicked themselves for not thinking of it themselves. So anyway, in the film, Turbo Kid has to free his robotic girlfriend from the juicing machine, and also along the way frees the Australian dude from the juicing machine, and in doing so, destroys the juicing machine, which results in Zeus chasing after them and hunting them down. So really the last half of the film is sort of a chase movie, which, as I said, ends in an extremely enjoyable climactic battle. Furthermore, the battle ends in a surprising twist. Well, it surprised me at least, I'm not sure if it surprised everyone else, but then when I went back and watched the movie again to write this review, I saw how obvious the twist was, which I think in the end is the telltale signs of a good twist. I mean, if you watch Fight Club for a second time, you feel like an idiot for not seeing the twist coming because it's so obvious, but it's not obvious the first time, and that's what I found from Turbo Kid. And if you haven't seen the movie but don't mind spoilers, I'm still not giving it away. Go watch the movie. So there you have it. The film has great visuals, a very enjoyable storyline, humorous dialogue, a monstrously evil, well-written villain, awesome over-the-top gore, and some adrenaline-rushing fight scenes. All of this alone would be enough to put Turbo Kid pretty high up on the list of movies I thoroughly enjoyed. However, it has something extra which adds to my enjoyment of the film even further, in the form of another genre it's mixed in there. Turbo Kid is, at the core of itself, a coming-of-age story. Why this impressed me so much is, 1, I completely did not expect it, and 2, it's probably the only coming-of-age story I've ever actually enjoyed. For instance, I thought Stand By Me was a ball-tastic ball-fest, and I know that's going to make a lot of people unhappy because it is supposed to be critically acclaimed, and a reviewer saying they didn't like it is like a book reviewer owning up and saying that they can't read. But I am a sci-fi film reviewer for a good reason. I don't really enjoy many films that aren't sci-fi. So the fact that the creators managed to work into the film a genre of movie that I would usually roll my eyes at and avoid because it's not really my area of interest, and made it so thoroughly enjoyable for me was an impressive feat. The story arc of the kid going from being scared to leave his small area of explored land to becoming a hero and then finally leaving his safe area to explore the wilderness was just thoroughly enjoyable. And so for this reason, and the reasons I listed earlier in the video, I highly recommend this highly enjoyable film. Highly. So if you've not seen Turbo Kid, stop not having seen Turbo Kid and go see Turbo Kid.
Thanks for watching. I have been and still am Grim Grindle.